first, Hallie rolled down and down, unable to stop himself. When he finally came to a halt, his head slammed painfully against a step. Sitting up, Solid Snake felt himself all over to see if anything was broken. Everything hurt, but everything seemed to be intact, although he had a headache that a Himalayan mountain of aspirin couldn't cure. Just as Hallie had hoped, the pillar was hiding a stairway leading to the basement. Of course, he'd expected to be going down the stairs on his feet, not his head. A huge bump was beginning to rise on the back of his skull, but he didn't have the time to pay it any mind. Hugging the shadows, Solid Snake made his way cautiously down the remaining stairs. He was so close to his objective now that he could almost taste it, but all of a sudden, he felt his body sagging. Weariness and fatigue overcame him, and he was so tired he could barely take another step. It was a long, long time since Hallie had rested or eaten, and he was out of rations. Also, the weight of the heavy equipment he was carrying was sapping his strength, and his headache, perhaps from a slight concussion, was pounding away inside his skull, making it harder to think straight. He tried to pull himself together, but it was very hard. Although the young Marine captain was well aware of the urgency for haste, he was afraid of making mistakes in judgment given his weakened condition. This was the most crucial part of the mission, and Justin Hallie couldn't afford to make one false move. As Solid Snake entered the basement, he heard guards all around him. Hallie knew that they were getting ready to unleash an attack on the free world, putting into operation the most powerful and deadly weapon ever devised by the mind of an evil man. If he used his weapons here, Solid Snake would reveal his presence before he even got to Metal Gear. He had to act as covertly as he could, disabling guards from behind rather than shooting them. His Snake Men training, not his powerful guns, mines, or grenades, were the only tactic he could rely on to get him to Metal Gear. One by one, using nothing but his bare hands, Captain Hallie took on the terrorist guards. His expertise in Tai Chi, the special breathing and the natural movements of the animal world, made Solid Snake a graceful shadow, silently stalking the enemy stronghold. Like a jungle cat, Hallie prowled unseen and pounced without warning. His karate blows and rabbit punches, delivered with trained precision, took out one enemy guard after another, and all in silence. The odd thing was that with every terrorist down, Solid Snake felt his strength beginning to return. He knew that he was coming closer and closer to his objective. And then, turning a corner with the image of the keycard map fixed in his memory, Solid Snake came face to face, for the first time, with Metal Gear. As soon as he saw it, Hallie recognized it. Nothing that huge and ugly could be anything else than Metal Gear. It was a tall, wide machine, made out of a shining black metal that Solid Snake had never seen before. The metal itself seemed to radiate evil. Could this mysterious unknown metal be the source of Metal Gear's deadly power? Metal Gear was truly awesome, menacing, and strange. On its side was painted the deadly insignia that Hallie had first seen in the jungle and later encountered everywhere in Outer Heaven. But displayed on the weapon, the evil markings took on a new and even darker meaning. Part of the machine was outfitted with a keyboard and a printer. So Solid Snake knew at once that what he suspected about Metal Gear was true. It was computer-controlled, and probably hooked up to a network of computers located throughout the terrorist nations. Even now, the printer was chattering away, issuing a readout target of every major city in the free world. Justin Hallie could see two buttons on the control panel, one red, one white, and a digital timer. Standing by the weapon's side, leaning over the instrument panel, were two men. One of them wearing an elaborate uniform complete with medals and decorations, was none other than Colonel Vermin Katafi, the world's leading terrorist murderer. The other man, hunched and broken, was Dr. Ivan Petrovich. Solid Snake slipped back further into the shadows to survey the weapon. Metal Gear was housed in an octagonal booth of shatterproof, see-through Lexan plastic. Each of the 8 sides was locked and guarded by an armed terrorist of matchless ferocity, strength, and cunning. These were Katafi's picked elite guards, his most murderous men. From the shadows, Hallie watched in horror as Katafi selected his primary target. Through the Lexan shield, he couldn't hear their voices, but their gloating look on Katafi's ugly face was hard to miss. And Hallie could almost hear that vicious laughter. Then, Katafi took a step away from the control panel, and Solid Snake could make out on the screen that the chosen target was Washington, D.C. No! The protest was yelled out in Justin Hallie's own mind, but from his lips came no sound at all. It was his Snakeman training that kept him silent. Katafi adjusted his coordinates and pressed the red button. The digital countdown in seconds began. The destruction of the free world had begun. Hallie saw the countdown start. 60, 59, 58. Less than 60 seconds to detonation. In under a minute, Washington would be reduced to rubble. And the other capitals would follow. Ottawa, London, Tokyo, Canberra, Paris, Wellington. Solid Snake thought faster than he ever thought in his life. It was now or never. This was what he'd been sent here to do. 8 guards. That was less than 10 seconds per guard. If Captain Hallie attempted to use his grenade launcher, or his rocket launcher, or his mines, he'd blow the entire basement sky high, and it would be too late to disarm Metal Gear. What would happen to the weapon's nuclear payload that was no doubt hidden somewhere, ready to launch? An explosion could trigger that launch. Solid Snake dropped all his equipment. Perhaps his body armor would give him some protection. He glanced over and saw the display. 55, 54, 53, 52. What about the locks on the Lexan shield? 8 locks, 8 keycards. Thank goodness Hallie hadn't left the other 7 keycards behind. What he had to do now was to defeat each guard in turn from 1 to 8 and put the right keycard into each lock. When all 8 cards were inserted, Solid Snake was sure he'd be able to get to Metal Gear. It would be a mortal hand-to-hand combat, like ancient Roman gladiators, between Hallie and each of the terrorist guards in turn. The only advantage on Solid Snake's side was that the guards were unable to leave their posts to gang up on him because they had to defend their locks every second. One by one, Solid Snake attacked the terrorists in a struggle for supremacy. The first guard went down, then the second. More than once, it was only Hallie's body armor that saved his life. From outside, the young Marine heard an incredible racket going on. The indistinct sounds of men's voices yelling, muffled explosions, rapid gunfire. No doubt the entire terrorist army had been deployed to burst in here at any moment and kill him. Solid Snake was not afraid to die, but he was determined to take Katafi and Metal Gear with him. Each time he overcame a guard, Hallie slammed one of the keycards into the slot at one side of the 8-sided shield. One more lock would disengage. The pressure was building. Hallie could see 40, 39, 38, only 38 seconds remaining. Using all his Snake Man skills, Solid Snake overthrew another guard. But even for the most courageous man in the Snakeman squad, 8 killers were too many to defeat in less than a minute. 3 were down, but 5 were still alive, with only half a minute to go. Only 3 keycards were in their slots. Fewer than half the locks were open. Perhaps it was the pressure he was under. Perhaps it was the pressure combined with his head injury. But Solid Snake suddenly felt as though the battle was all over, and he'd lost. Despair threatened to overcome him, and he felt his energy begin to ebb away. Hallie felt trapped and powerless, as though a strong net had been thrown over his body, and that he was being dragged off to his death, helpless to do anything about it. It was Justin Halley's worst nightmare, a recurring dream from which he'd wake in a cold sweat. Now it was coming true. He was failing in his mission. Meanwhile, the seconds kept ticking down toward the destruction of the world. Suddenly, just behind him, Solid Snake heard the barking of gunfire. The terrorists must have broken through, and the enemy now had him surrounded. At the sound of guns firing behind him, Solid Snake whirled around, ready to die, and equally ready to take as many of the enemy with him as he could. But to his astonishment, he saw not the enemy he expected, but Jennifer's brother Eagleman, Gray Fox, and the other snakemen he'd rescued, even Chuck. It was his old squad, weak and wounded, but coming to fight at Justin Halley's side. Metal Gear had been their mission too. Now Solid Snake was no longer alone. Now he had allies in the final battle. Only 2 of the snake men had found weapons. The others began attacking the remaining guards with sticks, pieces of brick and stone, anything they could get their hands on. Weakened though they were by their imprisonment and torture, their united strength caught the guards by surprise, and 2 more terrorists went down under the snake men's assault. Solid Snake raced over to insert the keycards in the other 2 slots. 5 guards down, 5 locks open, 3 more to go. Now Solid Snake needed all the allies he could get. Pushing aside the body of a fallen guard, he shouted through the open lock straight into the Lexan's shielded enclosure. Dr. Petrovich! Dr. Petrovich! Ella's alive! She's safe! We're the United States Marines, and we've rescued your daughter! Would the old man hear Halley's words? And if he did, would the words do any good? Dr. Petrovich was already so enfeebled. What kind of help could he give? Inside the Lexan booth, Dr. Petrovich appeared to come to life very suddenly. He stood up straight, and the years fell from his shoulders. Reaching out for Katafi's throat, he began struggling with terrorist leader to get at the white disarm button. For a minute there, the combat between the 2 men was almost equal. But Colonel Katafi was a much younger and stronger man, and he was armed. Dr. Petrovich had been subjected to the most vicious physical and mental torture, which had drained him of his strength. Yet he fought on, made stronger by the knowledge that his daughter was alive. With an effort, Katafi fought himself free of the old man's grip, drew his pistol from its holster, and brutally pistol-whipped the scientist. Dr. Petrovich slumped to the ground unconscious. But not before proving to Solid Snake what he needed to know. It was the white button the snake men had to reach before it was too late. The white button was the only thing that could stop the countdown on Metal Gear. Time had slowed down, but each second moved too fast. The display read 24, 23, 22. The battle continued. 7 of the 8 key cards had already opened 7 of the locks. Thanks to the help given by the snake men, 7 of the enemy lay unconscious. But there was still 1 more guard to go, 1 more lock to open. Captain Halley ran towards the guard, uttering his tiger yell at the top of his lungs. The force of his rush knocked the assault rifle out of the guard's hands. Instantly, the 2 men were locked in a life or death, bare-handed, one-on-one battle. The enemy held the advantage. All he needed to do was keep Halley away from Metal Gear for a few more seconds, and the terrorists would win. The free world would be destroyed. The task Solid Snake faced was far more difficult. In the same few seconds, he must overcome the guard, get the lock open, and then defeat the dictator Katafi in order to hit that white button. The enemy guard was fresh and very strong. Justin Halley was almost played out. A man with a mission. For many, many hours he'd been without rest. He'd braved and endured hazard after deadly hazard, fighting for his life every minute. It was a miracle he'd come this far. Did he have enough left to go the rest of the way? Now a weakened Captain Halley was struggling with the last guard, the strongest of them all. The other snake men lay wounded on the ground, too exhausted to help him. But they'd already done their job. Now it was up to Solid Snake alone. Nothing mattered but that white button. He could see the countdown continue. 18, 17, 16. Now the enemy had Solid Snake by the throat, his powerful fingers closing, throttling, trying to squeeze the last breath out of him. Justin Halley couldn't free himself. He was blacking out. Desperately, he looked around for help. Jennifer's brother, Eagle Man, was the nearest of the snake men. Jennifer's brother, Eagle Man, was the nearest of the snake men. He was lying on the ground, close to unconsciousness. "Bob, you have to help me," croaked Solid Snake, his voice greased to a whisper. "Take keycard 8 from me and put it in the slot. You've got to hurry. Never mind me. Just get the card. We only have a few seconds left." Eagle Man raised his head weakly and nodded. Then painfully, inch by inch, Bob O'Reilly dragged himself over and pulled the card from Solid Snake's fingers. While Halley still struggled with the terrorist, Eagle Man dropped keycard 8 into its lock. Now all 8 keycards were in place. Things began to happen all at once. As soon as the last keycard fell into place, the Lexan shield dissolved, disappearing into the ground. Metal Gear was now in the open, exposed. But the detonator timer was still ticking the seconds away. The digital display showed 15, 14, 13. The destruction of Metal Gear's Lexan shield took the enemy guard by surprise. For one split second, his hands loosened around the throat of Solid Snake. In that instant, using all his strength and cunning, Halley broke the guard's chokehold. Now, Halley summoned every ounce of strength he had left in his body. With his bare hands, he karate chopped the last terrorist guard and threw his limp form aside. Without thought for his own safety, Solid Snake hurled himself toward the Metal Gear, his right hand reaching for the white button that would disarm the weapon. But his hand never made it. As the Marine captain raced into the booth with only seconds to spare before detonation, Colonel Katafi raised his pistol and fired. The bullet reached his target, slamming into Halley's shoulder above the body armor. Blood began to pump from the wound. The impact sent Solid Snake's body spinning. But before he reached the ground, he twisted his body in the air like a cat. If he could only... It was his last possible chance of success, and it worked. Halley fell forward on the computer control panel, his hand outstretched. He saw the seconds move. 7, 6... With an angry roar, the dictator Katafi lifted his pistol to fire again. But before he could pull the trigger, Dr. Petrovich, now conscious, reached up from the floor and yanked the terrorist off balance. The gun fell from Katafi's fingers. Halley could see he was running out of time. 4, 3, 2... Solid Snake's hand reached the white button and pushed. The timer clock stopped. The countdown reaching 000001. With only 1 second to spare, Metal Gear was out of commission. The world was safe. With a beast snarl of psychotic rage, Colonel Vermin Katafi threw himself at Justin Halley. The two men grappled with each other, each trying to get the upper hand. Solid Snake was younger and stronger than the dictator, but he was wounded and losing blood. Katafi was a master of every evil, dirty trick in the book. The hand-to-hand struggle went on for minutes, and all the while, the noise of a battle taking place nearby became louder and louder, the gunshots sounding nearer and nearer. Halley reckoned that his fight with Colonel Vermin Katafi would be his last. At any moment, the remainder of the terrorist army would be in here, and that would be the end of the Snake Men. But the mission was a success. Metal Gear was disarmed, and if Solid Snake could only hang on here a little longer, he might be able to take Katafi with him. That would be a really blow struck for the free world. Suddenly, the battle was upon him. A group of armed men in uniforms ran in, brandishing their weapons. At once, Colonel Cataffy made a dive for the floor, going after his own pistol. Solid Snake saw the action and kicked out with the last remaining bit of strength in his wounded body. The kick caught Cataffy on the side of his head and knocked him out. The dictator lay sprawled at the side of Metal Gear, the monster he created to dominate the world. "Hallie!" cried an astonished voice. "Well, I'll be. Solid Snake, is that you?" "I'm hearing things," thought Justin Hallie. "It's that bump on the head and the loss of blood. I must be blacking out. I could swear I heard." "Solid Snake, it's me, Commander South! I'm here with the Foxhound Command troops and the rest of the Snakemen squad. We've got the Outer Heaven completely surrounded. My men are rounding up the last of the terrorists now. I can't believe you're alive, but you're wounded, man. You're bleeding bad. Medic, get over here on the double! Get this Marine some help!" "I'm all right, sir. Just a little woozy. Take care of my buddies first." Solid Snake pointed to the wounded Snake Men. "Eagle Man! Gray Fox!" Commander South couldn't hide his astonishment. "Did you free them, Hallie?" "Yes, sir. And I found Ellen Petrovich. She's safely hidden. That's Dr. Petrovich just getting up from the floor. He's on our side, sir." "And is that thing Metal Gear?" asked Commander South. "Yes, sir. Primed, loaded, and out of commission." "I don't know what to say, Hallie, except, well done! Now let's get you all out of here and into sickbay. You can tell me all about it when you're feeling better." "I'm feeling fine, sir. I'm very glad to see you." "But what about Cataffy, sir?" "Cataffy? Colonel Vermin Cataffy? Was he here?" "He's out cold, sir. Flying right the..." Solid Snake broke off, mystified. The spot where the dictator had been lying was empty. Cataffy was not there. "He's gone, sir! He must have escaped, but how?" Hallie took one step backward, wobbled, and nearly fell. He'd lost a lot of blood and was getting weaker by the minute. "Easy now, Solid Snake." Commander South put his arm around Justin Hallie's shoulder to steady him. "That evil maniac must have gotten away in the excitement. He knows every inch of this wretched place. There must be 1,000 holes for him to crawl into. Don't worry, one of these days we'll get him. Meanwhile, the chopper is topside and doctors are waiting." Hallie wouldn't move until he saw the last of his squad buddies loaded onto gurneys. Then, slowly, he followed Commander South out of the basement arsenal. His job here was done. Solid Snake's mission had been completed, and successfully. Metal Gear was now harmless, and in the possession of the forces of democracy. The Snakemen prisoners were on their way to the best medical attention in the world. Ellen and Dr. Petrovich were safe. The world was safe. Even so, Hallie knew that something was missing. His victory was incomplete, and he had the bitter taste of ashes in his mouth. In the doorway, Hallie turned. He spoke very softly. "Wait for me, Cataffy," he whispered. "I'll be back, so wait for me. You belong to me, and soon I'll be coming back to collect. Next time, you won't get away." He spoke very softly, but somehow Solid Snake knew, in his heart, that, hidden away somewhere, Colonel Cataffy heard his words. So there we have it. That was the unofficial novelization for the NES port of the original Metal Gear. And just for the record, this was a journey I went on with all of you guys equally, because I had never actually read this book until I started this video series. And, I can't help but think of what Nash Bozard said when he first saw the first installment of this video series posted to the website, when he said, "How do you make a story on the 8-bit Metal Gear? It's the 8-bit Metal Gear." Well, hopefully you guys found out. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. There are definitely a lot of creative liberties. I say this as someone, I hadn't read when I said I hadn't read the book before starting up these videos. That's true. But of course, I had seen and played the video game prior. I actually first saw the basis and storyline of the game on a actually a video guide VHS tape for how to play a number of the old Ultra Konami published games years ago. That was my first introduction to the game itself. Then, of course, I saw the Angry Video Game Nerds installment of this game, and I eventually was able to get a copy, and I have since played the NES game to completion. So I do know what the video game was about, and with that, I definitely know that there definitely are a number of creative liberties taken with this book between the games. Of course, Solid Snake, we never hear in the game his supposed actual name. Justin Halley was obviously just created by the author here. Some of the clues from the prisoners are the same. There's definitely some differentials. The location of the key cards in the book are definitely nowhere close to the same as what they are in the game itself. The locations of people like Dr. Petrovich and whatnot, you definitely can't jump from the moving bridge on the top floor. I give credit, the book here does actually show Metal Gear itself, because I think you're all aware, especially if you've seen the Nerds video, that the actual Metal Gear isn't shown in the NES port of this game. So at least props to them for taking care of that problem here, but definitely above all else, the ending to this book. I won't try to spoil anything else just in case, even though I'm talking about a game that's more than 30 years old, going on 40, I think. But it definitely doesn't have the same twist ending that the video game's ending has. And that they try to play with it a bit here in this, but it's definitely not the same. So there may be some disappointment. If you've played the game itself, I can't blame you if maybe you're a little disappointed with how this ended. This definitely comes off. The ending to this looks like it would have been probably the ending to a really dumb, cheesy 80s cartoon. Or maybe even a James Bond movie. Maybe I've got that on my mind since Awkward Ashley is reviewing Bond movies all the time, but this one wasn't terrible for me, but it did seem kind of mediocre, I have to confess. And I just hope a number of you may have found some more joy in it. Especially if you've read this before. If anything, I hope that maybe it might inspire you to hunt down a copy of this for yourself. Or especially even the other issues in this series. Because yes, this was only one of, I think, nearly half a dozen issues of this Worlds of Power book series, adapted from some of the NES games from the 8-bit era. And yes, we're going to show you more of those books. In fact, when we start up Rowdy Reads again, we're going to show you the book that first introduced me to this series, and one that still has a special place in my heart to this day. I look very much forward to taking you on that journey. But until then, as always, stay rowdy, my friends.